What year is it?
Sorry about that. I've been stuck at home for so long, I'm beginning to lose track of time, and this is really getting away from me. So, anyway, with COVID-19 continuing to be an issue, and wow, was that an understatement, it's not exactly safe for me to go out and play card games with my friends anytime soon. Thankfully, some trading card games have single player video game versions, with Yu-Gi-Oh! Having possibly the longest list. My name is Craig, and I welcome you to the Dungeon of the Discarded, home of the dead, abandoned, and forgotten games of years past. And today, I'm just gonna pick a random Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game. Let's see which one comes up. Oh no. Do I even need to explain what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is? What started in 1996 as a manga series by Kazuki Takahashi has since grown into a monster franchise, with an anime series currently in its 7th incarnation, and the best-selling trading card game of all time, according to Guinness. I personally own a bunch of these cards, and while I haven't actually played the game in years, I still have my old Lightsworn deck. Of course, with every successful franchise comes licensed video games, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a whopping 56 of them, 4 times what even Magic the Gathering has. The specific game we're going to look at today, Dark Duel Stories, known in Japan as Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 3 Tri-Holy God Advent, was the 6th of these games when it released in Japan in the year 2000, but it was the first to hit American shores 2 years later. And it's interesting. Before anything else, I should probably mention that Kazuki Takahashi, while a tabletop game enthusiast, is not a game designer. When he came up with the rules and mechanics for the Duel Monsters trading card game, it was intended first and foremost for his manga, not to be an actual game that people would actually play. As a result, Duel Monsters, as depicted in the manga and the early seasons of the anime, is an incoherent mess that would be hideously broken in reality if it would even be playable at all. I know Attacking the Moon is the big meme from this period that even made it onto a joke card in the real-life TCG, but that's honestly one of the lesser examples. Need I bring up the infamous Catapult Turtle Castle of Dark Illusions gambit? Needless to say, when Konami acquired the Yu-Gi-Oh! License to create their own real-life version of Duel Monsters, they redesigned the game from the ground up to actually, function. And the result, while not perfect, released in Japan in 1999 and globally in 2002, and, well, let's just say that by 2011 they'd surpassed 25 billion cards sold. Meanwhile, a lot of the early video games were seemingly developed independently of the real TCG. Not counting the ones based on different games that briefly showed up in the manga, most of them far more closely resemble the card game as it was seen in the early manga and anime than they do the card game as it's actually played. The manga version of the card game. The one that's an incoherent, hideously broken mess. No, I don't know who thought this was a good idea. A total of 7 games like this came out in Japan, though only 4 of them saw release internationally. And of those 4, Dark Duel Stories is without a doubt the worst. Sorry to spoil that right here at the start of the video, but it's kind of an unavoidable conclusion, really. Okay, enough stalling. Let's get this over with. Right off the bat, I have to say, this is a really good-looking game for the Game Boy Color, at least in terms of the sprites. The cards are all decently high-resolution images, by Game Boy standards anyway, that do an admirable job representing the artwork on the real things, and every single card has unique art, which may not sound like that big a deal, but remember that Game Boy Color cartridges could only hold 8 megabytes of data, and there are 800 unique cards in this game. Significantly more if you also consider the card construction feature. The character portraits also look fantastic. Unfortunately, most of the menus are just plain text on a monochrome background, and when you're actually in a duel, the animation is completely non-existent. So despite the really nice sprite work, the visuals end up being overall pretty drab and lifeless. The audio also sucks. The Game Boy wasn't really known for sound, sure, but there were still some games with pretty solid music. Pokemon, Zelda, Kirby, those soundtracks are iconic. The music in Dark Duel Stories is droning and repetitive, and I ended up muting the game's audio long before I finished the campaign. And how about that campaign, huh? Don't let the name fool you, there isn't a whole lot here. To start off with, you're at the high school with 5 opponents to choose from, all characters from the manga and anime. Yugi, Joey, Tristan, as well as Mai Valentine and Meiko Tsunami for some reason. This is supposed to be Domino High School, right? Since when have either of them been students there? Taya and Bakura would have made a lot more sense, frankly. Regardless, select your opponent, edit your deck if you have any extra cards, and start the game. And dear God, this is bad. I didn't even think it was possible to screw up the controls in a turn-based card game, but somehow they found a way. Look at this. Look at how slowly your cursor moves. I am mashing the button as fast as humanly possible. This is agonizing. The main menu isn't like this, so I have no idea what happened here. And if the laggy controls don't put you off, the actual game mechanics will. On a superficial level, this is just Yu-Gi-Oh! With the same mechanics you know from the trading card game. You've got monster cards, spell cards, and trap cards, and your goal is to destroy your opponent's monsters and reduce their life points to 0. But in practice it plays nothing like the real thing. Yeah, you still summon monsters from your hand, you're still limited to 1 summon per turn, and you still need to sacrifice monsters you already have if you want to summon one above level 4, but that's where things start to go off the rails. The biggest difference here is that attributes, or alignments as they're called in this game, actually do something now. That's always been one of the stranger things about the trading card game. A monster's attribute is rarely relevant to anything outside of some specific situations. It hardly feels necessary most of the time. So I do appreciate them trying to actually make use of this as a mechanic. Except this is not a good way to do it. In Dark Duel stories, every monster has one of 11 alignments, each of which trumps another, as seen on this chart here. Look at this. Look at this needlessly complicated nonsense. If you think this is a lot to remember and keep track of in the middle of a game, you're right, it is! Which makes it all the worse that it's vital information to know. When 2 monsters of relevant alignments battle, the one with the advantageous alignment will always win regardless of attack points. So your 3000 attack Blue Eyes White Dragon that you sacrifice 2 monsters to summon can be easily destroyed by Sagi the Dark Clown with 150 attack points just because its shadow alignment trumps your Dragon's Light. This was clearly inspired by a mechanic the manga used, which was dropped really quickly there too because it was way too much to keep track of. And it's just as much of a nightmare to deal with as you would expect, since you need to either memorize every weakness or keep this chart around all the time while you play. It's not fun. It doesn't really add much depth, and it only succeeds in making high-level monsters feel less worthwhile, since they feel really delicate no matter how strong they are, since they can be blown up at any time by something half their size. The only times I was grateful for this mechanic were when my opponent summoned a monster stronger than anything I could get over normally. But even then, I was left scrambling on the defensive, praying that I would draw a monster of the one alignment that trumped theirs. So thanks, I hate it! The other big change is fusion. Instead of using polymerization to fuse 2 specific monsters and summon a bigger one from the extra deck, you just summon a second monster on top of one you already have on the field. Most of the time, the new card will just replace the old one, but sometimes, on the rare occasions when they're actually compatible, they'll fuse into a different monster entirely. You won't know what you're going to get ahead of time, if anything at all, because the game refuses to tell you. You just have to stumble into combinations on your own and memorize them.
Why? Why would you do it this way?
Oh, and any monsters you create via fusion can't attack on the turn they're summoned, because that was a thing in the manga too. But unlike the manga, there is no quick attack card you can use to get around this. Not that I would ever consider using such a situational card like that, but that's beside the point. Additionally, anything you can summon via fusion can also be obtained as a regular card later in the game anyway, which just left me wondering what the point is of even having this mechanic in the first place. Bottom line is, I ended up never bothering with fusion unless I already had 5 monsters on the field anyway, and nothing to lose by experimenting. There are also some changes to the way your hand works. The size limit is reduced from 7 to 5, and instead of discarding at the end of the turn if you're over, you just don't draw at all if you already have 5. You can also discard any cards from your hand that you want at any time, probably so you never get stuck with 5 cards you can't play and no way to draw more. Oh, and trap cards are simplified. You can only play 1 at a time, it activates automatically when the appropriate condition is met, and if it hasn't gone off by the time your next turn comes around, it's discarded to no effect, which is really annoying. Anyway, you can battle the first 5 opponents in any order you want, but it's best to start with Tristan since he's by far the easiest to beat. He has no spells or traps, and his strongest monsters have only 300 attack points. Not that your situation is much better, to be fair. The deck you start off with also only has monsters, and the average attack points among them is 500. The strongest card in your starting deck is Yamatano Dragon Scroll with only 900 attack. Still, if you somehow manage to lose against Tristan, just give up on ever beating this game now. He almost never attacks you, just summons his weak monsters in defense mode, waiting for you to steamroll over them and come directly for his life points. But even as weak as he is, it can still take several minutes to beat him just because your own deck is so weak, meaning it takes forever to grind his life points down, one sub-1000 increment at a time. The laggy controls don't help either. But, after a duel that's both pathetically easy and mind-numbingly tedious, you beat the guy and learn that, if you want to move on, you don't just need to defeat every available opponent. Oh no, you need to beat them 5 times each. 5. I have seen plenty of arbitrary game lengthening tactics before, but this is the most blatant forced grinding I have ever come across. Can you imagine playing Final Fantasy and defeating some boss only for them to get right back up and say, oh no, you need to beat me 4 more times or it doesn't count. Your controller would end up in the trash bin faster than you could blink. But if you somehow haven't given up yet and beat Tristan 5 times, you've still got 4 opponents left to go. Next up, Yugi. Not Dark Yugi, just regular Kid Yugi for now. He's not all that much harder than Tristan. He's got a couple strong tribute monsters, but the rest of them are all 400 attack or less. He does have a couple copies of Dark Hole that he likes to pull out when he built up a strong field presence, but it's more of an annoyance than anything. And he drops much stronger cards than what Tristan will give you, so that's nice. Joey is where things start to get tricky. The starting deck is not going to cut it here. He has an irritating tendency to always draw Swordsman of Landstar, and its 1200 defense can be really hard to get over. Don't let it stay on the board for too long, though, because if he manages to summon his Red Eyes Black Dragon, you may as well just forfeit the game right then. There is no option to surrender. There's no option to surrender. You can't quit in the middle of a duel. You have to either reset the game, or just play it through to the end, even if you know you have no chance of winning. It feels like everything in this game was specifically designed to waste as much of your time as possible. Mai uses a lot of spell cards to beef up her monsters, so you'd better hope you have plenty of the right alignments to get around dudes with over 2,000 attack points. As for Mako, he likes to strengthen his monsters with the field spell Umi, but since the vast majority of his monsters are Aqua aligned, you can obliterate him with a couple of Thunder monsters. After you beat all 5 opponents 5 times each, for a total of 25 duels, you can move into the wider city and unlock the next 6 opponents, and get ready to be utterly demolished by the first big difficulty spike. Esparoba isn't too bad. I'd say he's about on par with Mai or Mako in terms of difficulty. Rex Raptor, though? I just could not beat this guy no matter how many times I tried. And this is where I realized that the forced grinding I mentioned earlier is actually not nearly enough grinding. See, when you win a duel, you get a card. Not a booster pack, not currency you can exchange for a booster pack, a card. 1 card. A single, random card. Which cards you can get are determined by which character you beat, and stronger opponents tend to drop stronger cards. Fair enough. The problem is, the drop rates on the strongest cards can be as low as 0.05%. That's 1 in 2,000 for a single copy. What if I want a full playset of 3? Thankfully, there is an alternative. Every Yu-Gi-Oh card, even to this day, features an 8-digit numerical code in the lower left corner, and a lot of the video games contain a password screen on which you can enter the code off of any card released up to that point, and receive a copy of that card in the game. The idea is to let people import their real-life card collection into the video game so they can duel with their own decks. It's a really nifty feature, though they stopped including it in new games after 2006, likely because of how easy the internet makes it to just look up the codes for every single card, removing the entire collecting aspect of the gameplay. Still, this feature is present in Dark Duel Stories, and you can use it to obtain all 800 cards if you have the time to painstakingly input hundreds of 8-digit passwords with a D-pad. There's also a password you can enter that causes Yugi's grandpa to appear after every duel from then on and give you an extra card, so you can get 2 each time instead of 1. I don't know why this is locked behind a password, but that's the way it is. However, even if you do take the time to input the passwords for a bunch of strong cards, there's no guarantee you'd be able to use them, because in addition to your deck building being limited by the cards you own, you're also limited by your duelist level. At the start of the game, your duelist level is 400 out of a maximum of 9,999, and each card is worth a certain number of points, and the point value of all 40 cards in your deck cannot exceed your current duelist level. So if adding that cool new card you just got would bring your total up to 401, you're out of luck and you need to remove it. And of course, there's no convenient way to see how adding a certain card will affect your total, since the deck building interface is pretty much the clunkiest thing ever. You can't easily swap 2 cards between your deck and collection. You need to go into your deck, remove a card, go back, go into your chest, scroll through the library of all 800 cards in the game, find the one you want, move it to your deck, and check to see you're not over your limit. If you are, you need to go back into your deck, remove a card, and repeat the whole cycle. So I hope you have a pen and paper handy to do all the math by hand to save some time, because that's why I play video games, to do math. You can't even use any spell or trap cards for a long time, because a single one can cost more than half of your entire level at first. There is also a card construction feature you can use to make new monster cards. Every time you win a duel, in addition to a new card, you also get a card part. In the construction menu, you can combine 2 parts, one top and one bottom, into a new card, and its power will vary depending on the parts used to create it. Between 140 top parts and 140 bottom parts, there's a total of 4,900 possible combinations you can create. Unfortunately, you're generally better off sticking to regular cards because the cost of these can often be obscenely high for what they are. Once again, the duelist level continues to be nothing but trouble.
So how do you raise your duelist level?
Well, every time you finish a duel, whether you win or lose, you gain 5 points. For reference, the average level 4 monster costs about 25 points. I think you can do the math on your own. So you are in for a truly mind-numbing amount of grinding. And this game was already so tedious and repetitive that I could only play it for a few minutes at a time before I could feel my brain starting to ooze out of my ears. So that almost put the kibosh on this video right there. Then I learned about a debug mode buried in the game's data and accessible using a cheat device. So I cheated. I'm not proud of that, but there was no other way this video was ever going to come out. When the debug mode is activated, you start with every opponent unlocked, 200 copies of every card, and this is the most important part, the maximum duelist level. I don't know why they included the duelist level as a mechanic to begin with, but not needing to deal with it was a freaking godsend. So back to the campaign. After you beat Rex, whether by hours of grinding or by cheating, comes Weevil Underwood, who will kick your ass with his Great Moth that evolves automatically every turn until it reaches 3,500 attack, and that's before he buffs it further with spell cards. Until you realize that most of his cards are forest aligned, Great Moth included, so a few Pyro monsters will make short work of him. Next up is the nameless Rare Hunter from the beginning of the Battle City arc, who's called Seeker in this game for some reason. I guess since the English dub hadn't gotten to that point by the time this game came out, they hadn't settled on a name yet. Just like in the manga and anime, he uses high defense monsters to stall until he draws Exodia. He's not that hard, but it can be a challenge to get over the defense of his monsters, meaning he will take a long time to beat. Then there's Arcana, here using his original Japanese name, Pandora. If you've cleared everyone else up to this point, he's not too hard. Just keep a few Dreams-aligned monsters on hand to deal with his 3 Dark Magicians. Lastly, you need to face Kaiba, and as you'd expect, he's the most difficult of these 6 opponents, with a lot of really powerful monsters, including 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons. You can take them out with any Shadow-aligned monster though, and he's only packing a single Dreams monster to counter that strategy, so once you figure that out, it makes the fight much easier. After defeating all 6 of these new challengers 5 times each, you can fly to Egypt and face group number 3.
So, you remember the difficulty spike between the high school and the city? The one between the city and Egypt is even bigger, because these assholes cheat. Just like the real card game, there are some cards so powerful that you're only allowed to have a single copy in your deck. Raigeki, Change of Heart, Pot of Greed, to name just a couple that are in this game. Every single one of these jerks is packing a few of these in quantities of 3. This game actively cheats against you. Well, now I don't feel so bad about cheating back.
The easiest of these 4 bastards, though easiest is very relative in this case, is Paradox, whom I think is supposed to be Shimon Moran from the Memory World arc. He's got some really strong monsters, a few powerful spells, and 3 copies of Brain Control, which lets him take control of your monsters. Oh, and Dion Keto the Cure Master, which restores 1,000 life points in real life, but in this game restores 5,000. It is not impossible to see him come up against the 9,999 life point cap this game has. Next up is Ishizu Ishtar, who's packing a similar array of powerful monsters, plus multiple otherwise limited spell cards, Dark Hole, Megamorph, and Swords of Revealing Light. It is not uncommon to see one Swords leave play only for her to drop another one. Between preventing you from attacking that way and blowing up the field multiple times with Dark Hole, Ishizu can take forever to beat, and you'd better hope she doesn't get a chance to summon Cosmo Queen and beef it up with her multiple Megamorphs, because its alignment is divine, meaning you cannot get around its attack points that way. You also need to face Priest Seto, Kaiba's ancient Egyptian counterpart from the Memory World arc. His deck is an even stronger version of Kaiba's, keeping the 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, and adding 3 copies of Dark Hole, Raigeki, Megamorph, and Change of Heart. Rarely a turn goes by when he won't take control of one of your monsters or just nuke all of them. Needless to say, dueling him is infuriating. And lastly, there's Heishin, whose name is horribly mistranslated as Slichin. He is not from the anime, but was created for some of these early video games, most notably as the main villain of Forbidden Memories for the PS1. As you would expect by this point, his deck contains 3 copies of Swords of Revealing Light, Megamorph, and Raigeki. Also quite a few Toon monsters for some reason. Aren't those typically associated with Pegasus? Compared to Priest Seto, though, he's a pushover.
But wait, there's more! Once you beat these 4 cheaters, once again, 5 times apiece, you unlock one more character to fight. But before I get to that, now seems like a good time to explain how this game is just fundamentally broken. And I don't even mean the wacky variant rules used here, no, this game made some baffling changes to a lot of the cards themselves, almost exclusively in ways that completely shatter what little balance this game may have had.
The spell and trap cards here are the most blatant. I already mentioned how Dion Keto was buffed to recover 5 times as many life points as it's supposed to, but that's far from the worst example. Brain Control no longer costs life points to use. Acid Trap Hole now kills anything with 3,000 attack or less. Change of Heart is permanent instead of only lasting for a single turn. Shadow Spell is a bit simplified, no longer preventing the affected monster from attacking, but it does reduce attack and defense by 1,000 each now, so I'd call that a buff. At least as far as the meta in this game is concerned. And those are just a couple notable examples, the list goes on. Some cards actually got nerfed instead. Megamorph, despite its weird description about changing a monster's level, now just gives a flat 500 attack point boost, but it's still limited to 1 copy per deck. The effective Pot of Greed is untouched, but because of the change in the way hand size works, it ends up being a bit less useful in practice. And that's not even touching Sparks, already one of the worst cards ever printed, which now only deals 50 damage to the opponent's life points. It may as well not even exist now for all the good it'll do you. The same goes for Fake Trap, another card that no one ever used, which in this game does literally nothing whatsoever. Most of these cards also have super vague wording here too. It's likely because of the limited space on the Game Boy's tiny 160 by 144 pixel screen resolution, but that doesn't excuse all of these cards whose effects are this unclear, both in terms of which monsters they can target and how much they affect their attack and defense points. You're basically forced to figure it out via trial and error. Ritual spells are here, but they now require the sacrifice of specific monsters to use, making an already impractical mechanic even harder to make proper use of. And since you can just tribute summon normal versions of all the ritual monsters anyway, what's even the point?
That same every monster can be normal summon thing ends up breaking a lot of fusion monsters too. Have you ever wanted a version of Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon that you can summon just by tributing 2 monsters? Say hello to this hideously overpowered 4,500 attack beat stick that can be dropped onto the field easy as pie. And its alignment is divine too, so you don't need to worry about some weak loser killing it out of nowhere. Wait, what the heck is a Blue Eye's Ultra Dragon? Even effect monsters are different. Specifically, most monsters that have effects in the real game are normal monsters here, which for the most part is a downgrade. Maneater Bug goes from slow but reliable targeted removal to a low-level trash card for just one example, but ends up having the opposite effect for a few specific cards. Dark Elf and Jirai Gumo are 2 monsters whose obscenely high attack for their level is somewhat balanced out by their crippling negative effects. In Dark Duel stories, neither of them have those effects, which makes the 2 of them, and Jirai Gumo in particular, completely game-breaking. 2,200 attack on a level 4 monster is not okay. No wonder half of the endgame opponents are running this thing. Speaking of which, so once you beat down all 4 of the characters in Egypt, Dark Knight, another character from Forbidden Memories, shows up, and as badly as those jerks cheat, he cheats even more. Of course, he has the requisite 3 copies of Jirai Gumo, but also full playsets of all of the most broken spell cards. 3 Raigeki, 3 Swords Revealing Light, 3 Change of Heart, plus 3 copies of the nerfed but still limited Megamorph to add insult to injury. If by some miracle you manage to defeat him, 5 times naturally, he gives you a password you can use to view the game's credits.
Whoop de flipping do, I hate every single person on this list.
But wait, there's still more!
There are also even more secret passwords you can use to replace Dark Knight with a few other opponents for some extra challenges. Dark Yugi is mostly armed with cards he actually played in the anime, a nice bit of attention to detail, but his deck is beefed up with all of the same broken spell cards used by Dark Knight, and dueling him is not fun at all for the exact same reason. Marek Ishtar is very similar, and once again, he's running 3 copies of Jiraiya and all of those overpowered spells. Dark Bakura? Same deal, 3 Jiraiya, 3 of all those limited spells. And Shadi may not have Jiraiya, but he does have all of the spells. Lastly, there's Nightmare. The final boss from Forbidden Memories, he serves the same purpose here. His deck is very similar to Dark Knight's, but a fair bit stronger, now rocking Gate Guardian as well as all 3 of its component parts. His deck seems primarily inspired by the Paradox Brothers from the anime, and I don't know why it's not just them there instead. Regardless, he's the toughest opponent in this game, and now you've seen all of them. Dear God, is his name appropriate though, because dealing with this entire last set of duelists is an absolute nightmare. Even with that debug mode active, I still lost. A lot. And when I did finally triumph over each of them, I didn't feel like I'd overcome a powerful opponent with my wits and deck building skills. I felt like I'd gotten lucky.
And that's just no fun.
There is also a multiplayer function letting you duel or trade cards with other players, and I guess that might make this game marginally more entertaining, but it's not enough to save it.
If I were to describe Dark Duel Stories in a word, it would be unsatisfying.
All you do in this game is struggle with an unintuitive interface, unresponsive controls, and poorly conceived game mechanics to duel against frustrating, and cheating, AI opponents, spending hours upon hours grinding over and over again, challenging the same enemies who never grow any stronger, never change up their decks or tactics, just tediously going through the motions until you're finally strong enough to face the next set of opponents and iterate the cycle.
Oh my god, now I know what people who hate JRPGs think those are like.
Now, there are circumstances in which I can imagine someone getting something out of this game. It was the very first Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game to be released in North America. Forbidden Memories released just 2 days later, but if you're a kid living in North America in March 2002 and you're obsessed with Yu-Gi-Oh! And absolutely need some kind of Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game fix during those 2 days, then by all means knock yourself out. But in any situation outside of that very narrow set of circumstances, play literally any other Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. There are more than 50 of them, and a lot of them are actually pretty good.
I like Yu-Gi-Oh! It's what got me seriously into trading card games in the first place, and to this day, the anime is one of my favorite guilty pleasures. But even I found no enjoyment in Dark Duel Stories. There's barely any real content here, and even with debug mode active to speed things along, it's still nothing but repetitive, mind-numbing tedium. Without a doubt, it's the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game ever, at least out of those released outside Japan, and I would even go so far as to put it in my bottom 10 worst games I've ever played. Sure, Duelist of the Roses, Reach of Destruction, those games are infamous, but they have actual story modes. Original stories too, not just regurgitated versions of the plot from the anime. They have something to make you want to keep going, despite their crappy gameplay. Despite its title, Dark Duel Stories doesn't have a story. It has to rely entirely on the strength of its gameplay. And its gameplay sucks. After all the monotony, all the frustration, it just left me feeling empty. I feel bad for Japan. They got 3 other Game Boy Color games in this style, and I can only imagine how bad they are. This was the hardest video I've ever had to make. Why did I think it was a good idea to subject myself to this in the middle of a stressful pandemic? If you'll excuse me, I need to wash away the taste of the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Game with the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. Until the next time you pay me a visit, this is Craig bidding you farewell from the Dungeon of the Discarded. And I should probably shave.
Special thanks to my $15 and up patrons, Bunny89 and Scott Collier. You guys are the reason I can keep doing this. You have my undying gratitude. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're still here. While I have you here, all cops are bastards, Black Lives Matter, trans rights are human rights, and if you don't like me saying any of these things and you want to unsubscribe, there's the door.